Please be seated. I want to invite you all to help me in reenacting a scene from Monty Python's Life of Brian. Right? So those of you who know it, help me out here. If you've seen it, you'll remember the scene. The crowd has become convinced that Brian is the Messiah, and they have all gathered outside of his house and are waiting for him to address them. And Brian appears on the balcony and says, Look, you've got it all wrong. You don't need to follow me. You don't need to follow anybody. You've got to think for yourselves. You're all individuals. And the crowd goes, Yes, we're all individuals. And Brian says, You're all different. Yes, we're all different. And then one person says, and I'm not, and is quickly shushed. Right? Yes, we are all individuals. We chant in unison. We all want to be God's special people, except for when we don't. We all want to be the unique, special flower in God's garden, and we constantly fear that we're not. We exist in this bizarre tension of wanting to stand out, wanting to be seen, wanting to be recognized, and wanting to fit in and blend in with the crowd all at the same time. Maybe that's just me. I don't think so. We all come into this world with needs for security and survival, with a drive for some degree of power and control and autonomy, and with deep needs for connection and affection and self-esteem. And we recognize that we need other people and we need planetary resources in order to meet those needs. And we also experience how other people can often get in our way and thwart those needs, and may even deny us of some of those needs. And if we've made it this far, if we've made it to today, we have all come up with various ways and means of getting whatever it is that we think we need, or what we think we need on most days. Surviving, certainly. Staying relatively safe. Having some degree of power and autonomy and control over our bodies, over our lives, and at least a modicum of affection and esteem. In other words, we all have these multiple programs that we run for getting the things that we need and achieving whatever it is that we believe or what we call happiness. We also know that certain people who look certain ways and own certain things and behave in certain ways seem to have more autonomy and control and seem to garner more affection and esteem than the people who don't look or behave in those certain ways. And so we've also created workarounds to account for that. Now, psychologically, these programs and these workarounds that we all have, they all run pretty far in the background most of the time, but they show up in the real world in a variety of ways. They show up as habits, as modes of thought, as ways of being, and these can be healthy or unhealthy. Very often these programs enable us to very quickly assign blame for any failure to achieve whatever it is that we believe or demand our happiness to be. And this blame can be directed inward or outward, and occasionally both at the same time. These programs show up as envy, as wanting what others have, so that we can be just like other people, so that we can keep up with the Joneses, so that we can be like all the other nations around us. I always hear my mother's voice when I read this passage from 1 Samuel. If all the other nations jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge too? These programs can show up as capitulation, or maybe sloth, wanting somebody else to make the decision. We want a Messiah, someone to show us the way. We want a king. We want a strong man. We want a real leader. We want someone who will go out before us and fight our battles. Never minding that we're the ones who are going to be cannon fodder for all of this king's battles. These programs can show up as self-righteousness, like we heard last week. How dare you do these things that are not lawful? Plucking grain and doing work on the Sabbath, for shame. Or they can show up as self-preservation, masked as well-meaning concern. Oh, he's gone out of his mind. We have to stop him from doing all this healing. Subtext, or he's going to get us in trouble. These programs can even drive us to demonize people who we don't understand or who challenge our worldview. He has a Beelzebul, and by the ruler of demons he casts out demons. Now, thank goodness we never see demonization of one's opponents these days. We're way past that. And worst of all of these programs that we run for our own survival and our own limited understanding and grasp of what happiness really is, all of these programs can actually blind us to the goodness and love of God that is ever present in the world. Looking at Jesus' healings, at returning people to wholeness and seeing only a threat that needs to be quashed, looking at a manifestation of God's liberating goodness and imagining it to be evil because it threatens some distorted form of benighted entitlement that we have, that is what one theologian calls, quote, a conscious and hardened opposition to the truth, and is the definition of an eternal or unforgivable sin. Father Thomas Keating has argued that in trying to get our basic needs met in this fallen world, we each of us create, quote, a universe with ourselves at the center. And he calls this our homemade self. It is this homemade self that simultaneously wants to stand out and blend in. It's the part of us that runs all of these programs of envy and sloth and self-righteousness and pride. The homemade self does keep us safe in the short term, but it also interferes with what we most need for the long haul. It interferes with our relationships with God, our relationship with our true, divinely imprinted self, our relationship with other people, with creation, with the whole of the cosmos, and ultimately with reality itself. This homemade self isn't demonic, but it is similar to all of the spirits that Jesus is constantly telling to be quiet and leave us alone. This homemade self is the self-appointed guardian of our being who desperately tries to keep us safe in the very limited way it knows how, by fitting in, by judging, by comparing, by building walls, and by refusing to see the goodness and the diversity of God's reality around us. It can, in other words, be read as the strong man that Jesus needs to bind in order to clear out the temple that is our soul. Friends, the spiritual journey that we are on is not about signing on with the Messiah who has the most followers. Nor is it about joining the community that confirms what you already believe is good about yourself and what is right about how the world works. The spiritual journey is really about learning how to decommission that homemade self, thanking it for its years of faithful service, but sending it off into a blissful retirement. And then finding a community where you can rechannel all of its prodigious energies into collaborating with God in doing the life-giving, reconciling work that God so wants us to do, and that this world so badly needs. Amen.